It was the summer of 2014, and Viktor Kazachenko was riding his dirt bike across the hot sandy road of northern Kazakhstan. It was the last stretch of road, and Viktor just needed to press on, but he would never arrive at his intended destination. The next thing he was aware of was waking up in a hospital. He had blacked out while driving his bike. He crashed and terrified the locals, who reported the crash to the authority, and they took him to the emergency room. However, Viktor wasn't the only person who had experienced this mysterious illness. In the village of Kalachi, Kazakhstan, there have been multiple reports of people falling asleep for days at a time, at the most random places, and at the most random time of day, with no clear explanation of what had caused them to suddenly lose consciousness. This medical enigma has plagued the town, and no one could give a valid theory. When these people woke up, they could not recall what they were doing as sleep overtook them. One notable person who suffered this tragic illness was Taisia, who was a mom in her late 40s at the time. She had experienced sudden sleep syndrome 3 times, in a short span of a few years. The first time Taisia suddenly lost consciousness was in June of 2012. She was doing what she normally does every day at work, nothing spectacular, just some office work, when she suddenly felt lightheaded. She fought the urge to fall asleep right then and there. After all, it would have been very inappropriate, and Taisia would risk losing her job if she had actually fallen asleep at her desk. She counted the hours until she was set to go home. She couldn't remember much after she got home. She wasn't sure if she had taken herself to bed, or if she just collapsed on the ground, but she woke up in the hospital. Families and doctors were nearby. They told her she has blacked out. Her kids were crying. They weren't sure what was wrong with her. A neighbor of hers actually found her at her home, and knew immediately that something was wrong, because Taisia is not the kind of person who would fall asleep on the floor. The neighbor took her to a hospital, but on the way there, she also fell asleep. Thankfully, she wasn't the one driving. The doctors discharged the 2 women days later after they were admitted. The doctors couldn't tell what was wrong with the women, and they couldn't keep the women in the hospital with no valid excuse, so they let the 2 women go home to their families. In March of 2014, Taisia found herself clutching the wall as she was getting ready to go out. She felt a sense of dizziness wash over her. She steadied herself. She had made plans with her friends and couldn't cancel last minute. Plus, she was really looking forward to the concert. It was going to be a lot of fun with her best friends. She decided to set herself an alarm and laid down on a chair. She woke up feeling refreshed, but the concert had been over for days. Taisia had been asleep for the last 5 days, and she was no longer at home. Her family had taken her to the hospital. In February 2015, Taisia was out walking on the street of her town, when she suddenly felt the familiar feeling of dizziness, but this time, she felt the mysterious illness in her legs, more so than her torso. She stated that it was as if her legs became very heavy, and she couldn't walk normally. The same feeling persisted for 3 days. Although she didn't black out this time, she was still walking about as she normally would. On the outside, people didn't notice anything different, but on the inside, Taisia knew something was very wrong. When she finally snapped out of it, her friends and family told her that she was talking as if she was under anesthesia. Horrifyingly, Taisia has no recollection of the last 3 days. Her husband consoled her. He had also experienced the same bout of sickness just a year before, in 2013. He was out fishing with his friends, when he suddenly lost consciousness. His friends took him to a hospital, and he later recovered. While at the hospital, Taisia rushed into the emergency room where her husband was being kept. She was able to start a few small talks with her husband, but his words were not making sense. It was almost as if he was talking to her through his dream, despite being awake. The same illness would plague more and more people as time went on. All the people affected were living and working in Kalachi at the time. Something was clearly wrong with Kalachi. In less than 3 years, 100 people have fallen sick with this mysterious disease. And the illness doesn't seem to spare anyone. Both adults and children were affected. The problem sometimes doesn't go away after those affected woke up. Some of them struggled with staying awake, and some would struggle with forming coherent sentences for the first few days after waking up. This phenomenon was so severe that the authorities decided to offer financial assistance to anyone who wished to move out of Kalachi. About 155 families took up the offer, and they never looked back. Strangely, some of those affected by the illness were dead set on not moving. They believed the sudden sleeping illness wasn't actually dangerous, aside from making the victims fall asleep for a few days. Scientists were called because too many people were falling asleep out of nowhere for days at a time. It's become too big of an issue to ignore it. At first, the scientists suspected that a certain intolerance to a certain drink was the issue, so they tested several types of alcohol and beverages being sold in Kalachi at the time. But when children started falling asleep too, they knew the answer shouldn't lie in the beverages being sold in Kalachi. It's something else. In total, about 7,000 tests were carried out, and the tests involved water, soil, air, patient's blood, and patient's hair. But they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Everything came out normal. There was nothing wrong with any of the elements tested. Authorities ordered the test of underground gas supplies and local phone towers. Some of the residents were angry, because they had gone without any gas for a few days. But they sure weren't too happy when their access to phone calls was taken away, for a few days next. Authorities turned off the phone tower to see if it could prevent people from falling asleep, and unfortunately it couldn't. The sleeping sickness persisted. Next, they test for radiation levels in parts of the town, only to find that the radiation level was consistent, and therefore, wasn't the problem. Radon levels were tested, and again, the result came out normal. As the last resort, they looked at the water supply for the town of Kalachi. Scientists took samples of the water from the underground water supply to test for the presence of heavy metals. There was none. As for whether the water was contaminated by certain viruses and bacteria, no, it was not. Just as they were about to give up, one of the scientists made one last suggestion, that they look at the abandoned uranium mine 2 miles away. Some of the scientists agreed that it was a good idea. They suspected that the radon gas in the mine could be seeping through the ground and affecting the residents living nearby, by causing oxygen deprivation and memory loss. The result for radon gas level and radiation levels came out, and again, they were normal. Even if the radiation level was off, it couldn't have been radiation that was causing the people of Kalachi to suddenly fall asleep, because excess levels of radiation would cause organ damage, not sleepiness. Some critics pointed out that the people of Kalachi had conspired to fake the sleepiness disorder, in order to gather enough interest so they could be assisted in moving away from Kalachi. But that is unlikely, because the illness took place over several years. That would have been a long time to wait for authority to maybe offer assistance in helping the villagers move. Some of the villagers who fell sick had remained as well. If they were so desperate to move that they made up the sickness, they surely would take up the offer, but they didn't. This theory was thrown out of the water. Eventually, the mysterious sleep illness garnered enough attention on the world stage that many people have heard about it across the world. The news of this sudden illness reached the ears of Viktor Kazachenko, who was the former director of the uranium mine. He arrived back at the village once more. And this time, he came with a revelation. He knew what was wrong with Kalachi's sleepy people. His answer to this mystery was simple. It was caused by carbon monoxide. We all have carbon monoxide detectors in our homes. Hopefully. An excess of carbon monoxide can cause sleepiness, loss of memory, and hallucinations. Interestingly, old homes with excess levels of carbon monoxide received higher reports of residents seeing ghosts. Some scientists were skeptical of Viktor's claim because the first case of sleeping illness started 20 years after the uranium mine had closed down. Viktor revealed that after the uranium mine closed, water was no longer being pumped out of the deep mine underground, and for more than 20 years, the cavities underground have been filling up with water. There were wooden support beams inside the mines, but after being submerged in the water for some time, the wood began to oxidize. At a depth of 2,100 feet deep, the pressure was 63 atmospheres. This caused a chemical reaction to occur, which turns the water into lighter gases, that then float to the surface of the mine. The level of carbon monoxide and hydrocarbon levels are indirectly proportional to oxygen levels. The escaped carbon monoxide that sipped to the surface of the mine, some of it get displaced to the area nearby, where Kalachi was situated. Wherever carbon monoxide level is high, oxygen level would be lower. Oxygen deprivation is what caused the villagers to feel sleepy and in some cases, black out entirely. If someone was unlucky enough to be nearby, where the carbon monoxide gas was sipping through the ground, the gas would enter their bloodstream, causing them to lose consciousness. Given all this information, the scientists set out to prove whether Viktor was correct. And he was. So the mysterious sleeping illness wasn't so mysterious after all. If you're wondering whether the villagers still live in Kalachi, yes, many of the residents remained, upon being given an explanation. For most, the risk of falling under the sleeping spell was a risk they are willing to pay to continue living in Kalachi. Thanks for watching until the end.